question is: an information security policy requires that all publicly accessible systems be patched with critical OS security patches within 24 hours of a patch release. All instances are tagged with the patch group key set to 0. 2 new AWS Systems Manager patch baselines for Windows and Red Hat Enterprise Linux, RHEL, with 0-day delay for security patches of critical severity were created with an auto-approval rule. Patch Group 0 has been associated with the new patch baselines. Which 2 steps will automate patch compliance and reporting? Choose 2. A. Create an AWS Systems Manager maintenance window and add a target with patch group 0. Add a task that runs the AWS install Windows updates document with a daily schedule. B. Create an AWS Systems Manager maintenance window with a daily schedule and add a target with patch group 0. Add a task that runs the AWS Run Patch Baseline document with the install action. C. Create an AWS Systems Manager State Manager configuration. Associate the AWS Run Patch Baseline task with the configuration and add a target with patch group 0. D. Create an AWS Systems Manager maintenance window and add a target with patch group 0. Add a task that runs the AWS Apply Patch Baseline document with a daily schedule. E. Use the AWS Systems Manager run command to associate the AWS Apply Patch Baseline document with instances tagged with patch group 0. Correct answer is B and C. Next question is: a security team requires all Amazon EBS volumes that are attached to an Amazon EC2 instance to have AWS Key Management Service, AWS KMS, encryption enabled. If encryption is not enabled, the company's policy requires the EBS volume to be detached and deleted. A DevOps engineer must automate the detection and deletion of unencrypted EBS volumes. Which method should the engineer use to accomplish this with the least operational effort? A. Create an Amazon CloudWatch events rule that invokes an AWS Lambda function when an EBS volume is created. The Lambda function checks the EBS volume for encryption. If encryption is not enabled and the volume is attached to an instance, the function deletes the volume. B. Create an AWS Lambda function to describe all EBS volumes in the region and identify volumes that are attached to an EC2 instance without encryption enabled. The function then deletes all non-compliant volumes. The AWS Lambda function is invoked every 5 minutes by an Amazon CloudWatch events scheduled rule. C. Create a rule in AWS config to check for unencrypted and attached EBS volumes. Subscribe an AWS Lambda function to the Amazon SNS topic that AWS config sends change notifications to. The Lambda function checks the change notification and deletes any EBS volumes that are non-compliant. D. Launch an EC2 instance with an IAM role that has permissions to describe and delete volumes. Run a script on the EC2 instance every 5 minutes to describe all EBS volumes in all regions and identify volumes that are attached without encryption enabled. The script then deletes those volumes. Correct answer is C. Next question is: a company wants to implement a CI/CD pipeline for building and testing its mobile apps. A DevOps engineer has been given the following requirements. Use AWS code pipeline to orchestrate the workflow. Test the application on real devices. Trigger a notification. Stage the application binary on a production bucket in a different account. Make the application binary publicly accessible. Which sequence of actions should the engineer perform in the pipeline to meet the requirements? A. Use AWS code commit as the code source and AWS code deploy to compile and package the application. Use code deploy to deploy the application binary to an AWS Lambda function for testing. Use a third-party library on AWS Lambda to simulate the device platform. Allow a Lambda role to upload to the production Amazon S3 bucket. Make the binary publicly accessible. Trigger notifications using Amazon SNS. B. Use GitHub as the code source and AWS Lambda to compile and package the application. Use another Lambda function to run unit tests and deliver the application binary to a development bucket. Use the binary from the development bucket and install the application on a personal device for testing. Deliver the binary to the production bucket after approval. Trigger notifications using Amazon SNS. C. Use an Amazon S3 bucket as the code source and AWS code build to compile and package the application. Use AWS code deploy to deploy the application binary to a device farm for testing. Deliver the binary to the production S3 bucket. Use an S3 bucket policy to allow public read on the production S3 bucket. Trigger notifications using an Amazon CloudWatch events rule with Amazon SNS. D. Use AWS code commit as the code source and AWS code build to compile and package the application. Invoke an AWS Lambda function that uploads the application binary to a device farm for testing. Deliver the binary to the production Amazon S3 bucket. Use an S3 bucket policy to allow public read on the production S3 bucket. Trigger notifications by using an Amazon CloudWatch events rule. Correct answer is D.